The dinner rush at the bistro was at its peak when the air in the room suddenly turned ice cold. At exactly 8:02 p.m., two men in charcoal gray suits stepped through the glass doors. They didn't look at the menu. They didn't look at the host. Their eyes were locked on only one person, Lori, the waitress clearing table 4. Lori didn't see them. She was too focused on the heavy tray in her hands and the tuition bills waiting for her at home. She was just a girl trying to survive the night. But Min and Ho, the man the entire city whispered about in fear, had been watching the door the entire time. As Lori hurried past his corner booth, his hand shot out, firm and steady, catching her by the forearm. He didn't pull her away. He pulled her in. Leaning so close his breath brushed her ear, he whispered the words that shattered her world. "Don't scream. You're in danger, pretend I'm your fiancé." Lori froze. The tray in her hand wobbled, the glasses rattling like her nerves. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "Do not look at the door," Min and Ho murmured, his voice as calm as a predator's. "The men in the gray suits. They aren't here for dinner. They're here for you." Lori's stomach dropped. She was a waitress from Harlem, why would professional hitmen be hunting her? But the lethal intensity in Min and Ho's eyes told her he wasn't joking. Before she could breathe, the Mafia boss stood up, sliding a heavy diamond ring onto her shaking finger and wrapping a protective arm around her waist. He looked across the room and spoke with a voice that commanded the entire restaurant. "Ready to go, baby? Our reservation is waiting." The bistro went silent. But the men in gray were already moving. As their hands reached beneath their jackets for silenced weapons, Min and Ho was already 10 steps ahead. What happened in the next 60 seconds would leave the restaurant in ruins, and unearth a dark secret about Lori's father that had been buried for 2 decades. Because the digital ledger those men were willing to kill for, was hidden in the one place Lori never thought to look. The truth was out. And tonight, the girl who wanted to be invisible, was about to become the most powerful woman in the underworld. Lori W. Davis moved through the crowded floor of the Soul Fusion Bistro with a grace born of pure necessity. At 23, her life was a series of timed intervals, the 6-minute gap between subway transfers, the 4-hour study blocks for her night classes, and the grueling 8-hour shifts where she smiled until her cheeks ached. To the high-rolling clientele of Manhattan's elite dining scene, she was a blur of black fabric and white linen, a nameless vessel for spicy galbi and chilled soju. She didn't mind the invisibility, in fact, she counted on it. Every dollar she tucked into her apron was a brick in the wall she was building to protect her younger brother's future. Since their father, a legendary but troubled jazz saxophonist, had passed away under mysterious circumstances, Lori had become the sole anchor of her family. The Tuesday night rush was particularly suffocating. The air smelled of seared ginger and expensive cologne, a thick atmosphere that usually muffled the sound of the city outside. Lori reached for a heavy tray of signature cocktails, her mind already racing toward the pile of textbooks waiting for her in her cramped Harlem apartment. She was tired, the kind of soul-deep exhaustion that made the neon lights of the restaurant seem to flicker in her peripheral vision. She just wanted to survive the next 4 hours, count her tips, and disappear into the night. But at 8:02 p.m., the rhythm of the room broke. The heavy glass doors swung open, and 2 men stepped inside. They weren't dressed like the tech moguls or fashion influencers who usually frequented the bistro. They wore charcoal gray suits that seemed to absorb the ambient light, their faces devoid of the hunger one usually brings to a restaurant. Their eyes didn't linger on the art or the menu. They moved with a predatory, synchronized precision, scanning the staff until they locked onto Lori. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept down her spine. She felt a sudden, inexplicable weight in the air, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. She turned toward table 4, her hands trembling slightly as the glasses on her tray rattled. She tried to tell herself it was just the caffeine, or the lack of sleep, but her instincts. Honed by years of navigating the city's toughest corners, screamed that the hunters had finally found their mark. Lori didn't see the men in gray begin their slow, calculated approach. She didn't notice the way they adjusted their jackets to hide the lethal silhouettes beneath the fabric. She was a civilian in a war zone she didn't even know existed. However, from a secluded corner booth, Min and Ho saw everything. The most feared name in the Korean underworld, a man who lived and breathed the language of violence, didn't miss the shift in the room's energy. He watched the assassins, recognized the cold efficiency of the Seoul Syndicate, and then he looked at the young woman who was seconds away from a nightmare. As Lori stumbled past his table, her eyes wide with a growing, nameless fear, Min and Ho reached out and caught her. It was a movement so swift and silent it seemed like a trick of the light, drawing her into a world where invisibility was no longer an option. Lori felt the heat of Min and Ho's breath against her ear, a stark contrast to the sudden, icy dread paralyzing her limbs. Her mind screamed to run, to drop the tray and bolt for the kitchen, but his grip on her arm was an anchor. It wasn't the grip of a captor, but that of a man holding a precarious bridge together. "Don't look at them," he repeated, his voice a low, melodic vibration that somehow cut through the clatter of silverware. "Look at me. Only me." With a slow, deliberate movement, Min and Ho reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal blazer. The men in the gray suits were closing the distance now, their hands hovering near the waistbands of their slacks, their predatory focus intensifying as they realized their target was no longer alone. In one fluid motion, Min and Ho produced a velvet-lined box, snapping it open just enough for a flash of brilliant, cold light to catch the restaurant's dim chandeliers. Lori gasped as he took her left hand. His fingers were calloused and steady, sliding a heavy, emerald-cut diamond onto her ring finger. The gold band was cold, a weighted shackle that felt like it cost more than her apartment building. "They are here to take you, Lori," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers with a piercing intensity that demanded her trust. "But the Seoul Syndicate does not touch what belongs to Min and Ho. From this moment, you are my fiancé. Play the part, or you won't make it to the sidewalk." He stood up then, his presence expanding to fill the space around them, instantly shifting from a quiet diner to the apex predator of the room. He didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he interlaced his fingers with hers, pulling her flush against his side. The tray she had been holding was forgotten, discarded onto the table by Min and Ho's free hand with a sharp clatter that drew every eye in the bistro. "Come now, my love," he said, his voice projecting with a practiced, arrogant warmth that echoed off the walls. "We've kept the driver waiting long enough." As they began to walk toward the exit, the two men in gray shifted their path to intercept. Lori's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, her legs feeling like leaden weights. She could see the reflection of the hit men in the polished brass of the doorframe, their hands were already submerged in their jackets. Min and Ho didn't flinch. He walked with the relaxed gait of a king, his thumb tracing a comforting circle on the back of her hand, even as his eyes remained narrowed, tracking the slightest twitch from the men in the shadows. As they passed the first assassin, the air grew so thin Lori felt she might faint, but the ring on her finger, the symbol of a dangerous, fabricated lie, shimmered with a defiant light, a shield forged in the fires of the underworld. The transition from the restaurant's warm, ginger-scented air to the clinical chill of the street happened in a blur of motion. Min and Ho didn't break his stride, his arm a solid, unyielding weight around Lori's waist as he guided her toward a waiting black SUV. The vehicle sat idling at the curb like a dark, resting predator. A driver, face obscured by the night, held the door open, and before Lori could process the adrenaline spiking in her chest, she was swept into the hushed, leather-scented interior. The door closed with a heavy, pressurized thud, cutting off the city's cacophony. Silence rushed in, thick and absolute. Lori sat huddled in the corner of the deep bench seat, her breath coming in shallow hitches. She stared down at the diamond on her finger. It felt heavy, a physical anchor to a life she didn't recognize. Across from her, Min In-ho didn't look like a fiancé anymore. He looked like a general. He tapped a button, and a glass partition slid upward, sealing them in a private, moving fortress. Who are they? Laurie's voice was a ghost of itself, barely audible over the hum of the tires against the pavement. Why are they following a waitress? Min In-ho leaned back, the shadows of the passing streetlights dancing across his sharp jawline. They aren't following a waitress, Laurie. They are following the daughter of Elias Davis. Laurie flinched at the mention of her father's name. My father was a musician. He played the saxophone in basement clubs. He didn't have anything to do with people like you. Your father was a genius, but not just with music, Min In-ho said, his voice dropping into a cold, factual register. He was the primary courier for the Seoul Syndicate's Western operations. 20 years ago, he vanished with something they've been hunting for ever since, a digital ledger. It contains every bribe, every offshore account, and every name associated with the elders. Laurie shook her head, her curls bouncing in the dim light. No. We were poor. We lived in a walk-up in Harlem. If he had a fortune, why did he die with nothing? Because he wasn't a thief, Laurie. He was a man trying to buy your freedom, Min In-ho explained, his intense gaze never leaving her face. He didn't spend the money. He hid the key to it. The syndicate believed the secret died with him, but a week ago, an old signal from his encryption hit the grid. They think you found it. They think you're preparing to sell it. He leaned forward, the space between them shrinking until she could see the grim reflection of her own fear in his dark eyes. They don't want the ledger back to get rich. They want it back so they can burn it, and anyone who has ever touched it. To them, you aren't a person. You're a loose end that needs to be severed. Laurie looked out the tinted window, the city she thought she knew blurring into a streak of neon and gray. The invisible wall she had built around her life hadn't just been breached, it had been leveled. She wasn't just a girl with tuition bills anymore. She was the keeper of a dead man's legacy, and the only person standing between her and a shallow grave was the man currently wearing the other half of her lie. The SUV glided through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, the city lights streaking across the tinted windows like neon scars. Inside, the air remained heavy with the revelation that Laurie's life had been a lie. She looked down at her hands, hands that had carried trays and scrubbed tables. Trying to reconcile them with the image of a man she thought she knew. Her father, Elias, had been a man of rhythm and blue notes, a man who smelled of saxophone reeds and expensive tobacco, not blood and betrayal. My father was a good man, Laurie whispered, her voice cracking as she fought the rising tide of grief. He taught me that music was the only thing that couldn't be stolen from you. He didn't belong in your world. Min In-ho watched her, his expression unreadable, yet there was a flicker of something resembling respect in his gaze. He was a great musician, Laurie. That is exactly why he was the perfect courier. No one looks twice at a jazzman carrying an instrument case through the back door of a club. He could travel from New York to Seoul, from London to Tokyo, and the syndicate's most sensitive data traveled with him, hidden inside the bell of his tenor sax. He leaned closer, the scent of his cologne. Sandalwood and something metallic, filling her senses. Elias wasn't just a delivery boy. He was a ghost. He was the only one the elders trusted with the physical keys to their digital kingdom. But 20 years ago, he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. He realized the music he was carrying was the sound of 1,000 lives being destroyed. He didn't just run, he took the syndicate's heartbeat with him. Laurie closed her eyes, a memory surfacing of her father sitting in their dark apartment, meticulously cleaning his saxophone for hours, his hands trembling despite his calm face. She had thought it was the tremors of an aging artist. Now, she realized it was the terror of a hunted man. He lived in Harlem to hide in plain sight, Min In-ho continued, his voice a low, rhythmic hum. He worked for tips and played for drinks because he knew that if he ever looked wealthy, the syndicate would find him. He sacrificed everything, his career, his fame, and eventually his life, to keep that ledger out of their hands. He wasn't just hiding a secret, Lori. He was hiding you. The weight of her father's silence hit her with the force of a physical blow. Every struggle they had endured, every night they had gone hungry while he clutched that instrument case, had been a calculated move in a deadly game of chess. He hadn't been a failing musician, he had been a guardian of a weapon that could level an empire. Why tell me this now? Lori asked, opening her eyes to find Min-in-ho watching her with an intensity that made her pulse race. Because the syndicate knows the music has stopped, he replied coldly. And they believe you're the one who knows where the instrument is buried. The safe house was a sprawling, glass-walled fortress perched high above the Hudson, a place where the city's chaos felt like a distant memory. But inside, the silence was jagged. Lori paced the length of the cold marble floor, the diamond ring on her finger catching the moonlight like a mocking eye. Min-in-ho sat at a mahogany desk, his focus divided between a wall of security monitors and a handgun he was cleaning with terrifying, rhythmic precision. He hadn't spoken since they arrived, his silence a wall she couldn't climb. "We can't stay here," Lori whispered, the sound of her own voice startling her. "If they found me at the bistro, they'll find me here. They know who you are." Min-in-ho didn't look up. "They know who I am, Lori. That is why they will hesitate. To strike at this house is to declare war on the 5 dragons. Even the Soul Syndicate isn't that reckless." He was wrong. The words had barely left his lips when the perimeter alarm let out a low, mournful chime. On the monitors, the thermal cameras flared. 4 silhouettes, moving with the synchronized grace of professional ghosts, had already cleared the outer fence. They weren't using explosives or shouting orders, they were silent, surgical, and fast. Lori's heart lunged into her throat. "They're here." Min-in-ho stood up, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a dying gasp. He didn't look panicked, he looked hollowed out, a man returning to his natural state of violence. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing Lori's hand and pulling her toward a reinforced steel door disguised as a bookshelf. "Get in the crawl space. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear," he commanded, his voice a lethal rasp. "What about you?" she asked, her fingers clutching his silk lapel. "I am the reason they will fail," he replied. The glass of the balcony shattered, a crystalline explosion that rained diamonds across the floor. Lori scrambled into the darkness of the hidden compartment, watching through a narrow slit as the first assassin vaulted into the room. The man moved like water, a silenced submachine gun raised, but Min-in-ho was faster. He didn't hide. He met the threat head-on, a blur of shadow and steel. The room erupted into a muted, terrifying ballet of violence. The only sounds were the soft thud of bodies hitting the floor, the metallic clack of spent casings, and the heavy, ragged breathing of men fighting for their lives. Lori watched, paralyzed, as the man she had served coffee to just hours ago dismantled the syndicate's finest with a cold, mechanical efficiency. He wasn't just protecting her, he was erasing the threat. In that moment, the fiancé lie felt dangerously real, not because of the ring, but because of the terrifying lengths he was willing to go to keep her alive. For the first time, Lori realized that the man standing between her and death was just as dangerous as the men trying to kill her. The adrenaline from the breach had begun to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. They were in a secondary safe house, a sterile, concrete basement miles from the glass fortress, where the only sound was the distant hum of a generator. Min-in-ho was reloading a magazine, his movements methodical and detached, but Lori couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She stared at the heavy diamond ring, its brilliance a stark contrast to the grime of their escape. "They won't stop," she whispered, her voice echoing off the damp walls. "They found the bistro. They found your house. They'll find the ledger before we do. Min and Ho paused, the metallic click of a round seating into place punctuating the silence. They are looking for a digital signature, Lori. A ghost in the wires. But your father was a ghost of the old world. He knew that anything on a server can be hacked. The physical key is the only thing that matters, and only you can lead me to it. Lori closed her eyes, trying to reach back into the foggy memories of her childhood in Harlem. She pictured their cramped walk-up, the smell of pine sol and old sheet music, and the sound of her father's saxophone drifting through the thin walls. She remembered him sitting by the window every evening, playing a specific, haunting melody, a sequence of notes that never changed. The blue room, she murmured. Min and Ho sharpened his gaze. What? It's a song he wrote for me, Lori said, her heart beginning to rhythmically thud against her ribs. But it wasn't just a song. He used to make me hum the bridge every night before bed. C sharp, E, G flat, B. He told me it was the combination to our lives. I thought he was just being a musician, being eccentric. She stood up, the memory sharpening with a sudden, visceral clarity. He didn't hide it in a bank or a locker. He hid it in the one place he knew I would never leave behind if I had to run. The floorboard under the radiator in my old bedroom. He used to tap out that same rhythm on the wood while he practiced. C sharp, E, G flat, B. That wasn't just music. It was the pattern for the pressure-sensitive latch he built into the floor. Min and Ho stood, his shadow stretching long across the concrete. The cold calculation in his eyes shifted, replaced by a grim sense of purpose. The syndicate is already scouring the city's digital footprints, but they aren't looking at a dilapidated apartment in Harlem. We have a window, Lori. But once we move, the Fiancé act ends. The moment we step into that building, we are targets in the open. Lori twisted the diamond ring on her finger, no longer feeling its weight as a burden, but as a promise of the war to come. Then let's go. My father didn't spend 20 years hiding just for me to die in a basement. The Harlem street was a graveyard of memories, shrouded in a heavy, charcoal mist that clung to the brickwork of the old walk-ups. Min and Ho's sleek SUV remained blocks away, a ghost in the shadows, while they moved on foot through the narrow alleyways. Lori felt the weight of the diamond ring against her glove, a constant, cold reminder that the life she was trying to reclaim was already gone. Beside her, Min and Ho was a silent specter, his silhouette blending into the darkness, his hand never straying far from the suppressed weapon beneath his coat. 10 minutes, he whispered, his voice barely a ripple in the humid night air. The syndicate has 2 cars circling the block. They're looking for a signature, not a shadow. Keep your head down. They reached the rusted fire escape of her old building, the metal groaning under their weight like a warning. Lori's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as they slipped through the window of her childhood apartment. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and rot, a hollowed-out version of the home she remembered. Every shadow seemed to hold a memory of her father, the way he leaned against the peeling wallpaper, the sound of his phantom saxophone echoing in the silence. Lori knelt by the radiator in her old bedroom, her fingers trembling as she touched the scarred wood of the floorboards. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to hear the melody. C sharp, E, G flat, B. She tapped the rhythm out, her pulse syncopating with the sequence. On the final note, a faint, mechanical click resonated through the floor. A small section of the wood shifted, revealing a hidden compartment lined with velvet. Inside sat a small, tarnished silver USB drive and a handwritten note in her father's elegant script. Just as her fingers brushed the cold metal, a flash of red and blue light swept across the ceiling from the street below. The low rumble of an engine idling too close sent a jolt of electricity through her. "They're here," Min and Ho hissed, his eyes fixed on the street from the edge of the grimy window. He didn't move toward the exit. Instead, he stepped toward her, his presence a shield of lethal intent. They found the car. We have 30 seconds before they breach the stairs. Lori clutched the drive to her chest, the jagged edges digging into her palm. The retrieval was over, but the escape had just become a countdown. She looked at the man who had claimed her as his own in a room full of killers, and for the first time, she didn't see a mafia boss. She saw the only person who could lead her out of the graveyard and into the light. The sirens were a distant, rhythmic wail against the Harlem skyline as they retreated into the bowels of a derelict subway maintenance tunnel, the only path Min In Ho deemed safe enough for the next hour. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient iron. Lori sat on a rusted equipment crate, her fingers trembling as she pulled the silver USB drive from her pocket. The diamond ring on her hand felt heavier than ever, no longer a mere prop for a lie, but a symbol of the war her father had started 2 decades ago. Min In Ho produced a rugged, military-grade laptop from his tactical pack, its screen casting a sharp, blue glow against the grime-streaked walls. Without a word, he took the drive from her and slotted it home. The interface hummed to life, a series of complex encryption prompts flickering across the monitor. Lori leaned in, her breath hitching as she watched the final barrier fall. C-sharp, E, G-flat, B, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the darkness. Min In Ho typed the corresponding numeric values of the notes into the bypass prompt. The screen blinked once, then blossomed into a waterfall of data. It wasn't just numbers or bank accounts, it was a digital graveyard. Row after row of high-resolution photographs, scanned documents, and recorded conversations filled the screen. Lori's eyes scanned the names at the top of the primary ledger, the elders of the Soul Syndicate. The air left her lungs as she saw the signatures on the final page. They weren't just names from the underworld, they were the names of politicians, city officials, and even the very men who had stood on the stage at her father's memorial service, offering hollow condolences to a grieving 10-year-old girl. They didn't just kill him because he stole the ledger, Lori realized, her voice hardening with a cold, sharp clarity. They killed him because he recorded the moment they shook hands on his murder. Look at the date, In Ho. The timestamp on the final encrypted file was the night of the accident, the hit and run that had stolen her father's life. Attached was a grainy audio file. As Min In Ho pressed play, the familiar, gravelly voice of her father filled the tunnel, layered over the low, mournful hum of a saxophone. He wasn't playing a song, he was narrating his own death sentence, naming the men in the gray suits and the masters who pulled their strings. Lori looked at Min In Ho, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something human in his calculated gaze, a shared recognition of the weight they were now carrying. The invisible girl was gone. The waitress who worried about tuition had been replaced by a woman who held the power to incinerate an empire. She reached out and touched the screen, her finger tracing the names of the men who thought they had gotten away with it. They think they're hunters, she whispered, her voice devoid of fear. But they have no idea what's coming for them. The blue glow of the laptop finally faded, replaced by the amber warmth of a sunrise that felt like the first one Lori had truly seen in years. They were back in the high-rise, the shattered glass replaced and the scent of gunpowder long scrubbed away. Min In Ho stood by the window, his silhouette a sharp, dark line against the awakening Manhattan skyline. He hadn't asked for the drive. He hadn't demanded the ledger. He simply waited, giving her the one thing no one in the syndicate ever had, the agency to decide her own fate. Lori looked down at the diamond ring. It was no longer a weight or a shackle. She realized that the invisible girl, who had scrubbed floors at the bistro had died in that Harlem walk-up, buried under the same floorboards that held her father's secret. She didn't want to go back to that life. She didn't want to hide in witness protection, waiting for a different set of shadows to find her. She wanted the power to ensure the shadows never stood a chance. The FBI would take years to process this, Lori said, her voice steady and resonant in the quiet room. The men who killed my father would have their lawyers find every loophole. They would retire in villas while I lived in a trailer park under a fake name. Min In Ho turned slightly, his eyes tracking the cold determination on her face. And what do you propose, Lori? She walked toward him, the silver USB drive clutched in her hand like a scepter. You wanted to protect me because I was a loose end. Now, I'm the only one who can pull the thread. I don't want to be protected anymore, In Ho. I want to be the partner who helps you burn the syndicate to the ground. We use the ledger to dismantle the elders, and in the vacuum they leave behind, we build something that can't be touched. A ghost of a smile touched Min In Ho's lips, the first genuine expression she had seen from him. He reached out, not to take the drive, but to cover her hand with his. The fake engagement had been a survival tactic, a lie whispered in a crowded restaurant to stay alive. But as their eyes met, the deception dissolved into a terrifyingly real alliance. The city is a monster, Lori, he murmured, his thumb brushing over the diamond. It eats the weak. Are you ready to be the one who feeds it? I've spent my life serving people who didn't even see me, Lori replied, her gaze never wavering. I think it's time they learned my name. 6 months later, the bistro at table 4 remained empty, a silent tribute to the night everything changed. But in the penthouse overlooking the park, the Fiancé sat at the head of a new table. The Soul Syndicate was a memory, its leaders erased by the very data they had died to protect. Lori W. Davis was no longer invisible. She was the architect of a new underworld, standing beside the only man dangerous enough to match her. The ring remained on her finger. No longer a disguise, but a signature of a legacy that was just beginning.